She was this gun-toting, whiskey-drinking broad.
The super epic fucking broad.
She was a pioneer in the industry.
She's also so famous and so controversial.
So controversial.
So she's kind of a big fucking deal.
Her story is so incredible. She belongs on this podcast because she's a broad you should know. Hello and welcome to Broads You Should Know, the podcast about amazing and noteworthy women from history. I am your host, Sarah Gorski, and I am here again with Miss Amelia Hamill. Love you, Amelia. Hi.
Hi. You know I love hanging out here. You can't keep me away.
Love it. I love having a buddy again on the reg. Like, it's so much less lonely than just talking to myself and my cats.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure the cats enjoyed it, but...
They don't speak English, sadly.
I'm convinced my cat does. She just refuses to answer me in English.
Actually, that's probably the truth. Like that they understand and they just don't give any fucks.
Yeah, they're just like, yeah, I'm not gonna try and pronounce that. You go have fun with that.
Yeah. That's probably the truth.
She's also,
well, I'm glad you're back.
Over my shoulder over here giving me dirty looks. She wants.
I know mine are still sleeping.
She wants treats.
Uh-oh.
I know.
Sometimes I have to do treats in the middle of the recording session, but not today. Everyone is doing okay. So we'll just keep our fingers crossed. Okay. It holds true. Well, I'm super excited that you are back this week because we are going to talk about the other half of my last episode.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one.
Yeah, you remember we talked about Sofia Tolstoyana, Leo Tolstoy's wife, and they're both amazing and also shockingly horrific marriage, especially towards the end, but also what an amazing woman she was and how she actually made him what he was. But the other half of this story is kind of the comparison between that marriage and Sofia and Anna Grigoryevna, Fyodor Dostoyevsky's wife, because they had vastly different life experiences, but also weirdly, I feel like Sofia and Anna are kind of similar. Like, there's a lot of similarities in their stories, but obviously their husbands were very different people from each other, which is so funny. But their paths do intersect, by the way, which is strange. Like, Tolstoy met Anna and there's quotes about like what she was like when he met her. And yeah, I'll get to that in a little bit. But they were both writing at the same time, these great Russian writers.
I wonder if 100 years from now, people are going to be talking like that about movie stars. Like, there's a whole bunch of quotes about when Robert Downey Jr. met this person. You know what I mean?
I don't know. That's a really good question in terms of what is the long-term modern celebrity story?
Because I feel like, literary, to me, it makes sense to focus on the literary fame and that kind of a thing. But I don't know. In 100 years, are we even going to care about the people that are famous now? I don't know.
Well, and when I think about and I'm also saying this as a Russian lit nerd, but these novels that these men wrote they're so definitive of Russian culture, and they shaped the nation and shaped and articulated the culture of the time period. That is why they were so famous, right? Is that they became this kind of cultural representation of what it was to be Russian and what it was to live a Russian life, especially at that time period. This is, they were writing right before the revolution, for the most part. And I don't know. Modern celebrity though is it having that profound of an effect on people? I don't feel like the answer is yes.
Well, I guess I suppose the question would then be what constitutes the art that lasts outside of its own.
I mean, I think that people will be talking about the most poignant examples of recent days are Taylor Swift's Eras tour and Beyonce's tour, these moments where all these people come to this concert and they have this experience together. That is what I imagine is the closest thing right now to
But is The Godfather
to those kinds of
still
experiences
gonna be the movie? You know what I mean?
Well, it might. I think The Godfather might be the movie, but will Al Pacino be quoted in everything? I don't know. I don't think that's. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, or even Scorsese.
There's a difference.
Or not Scorsese. I meant Coppola.
Well, same difference. No, I'm just kidding. Nobody write in.
Well,
Yeah, no, this is a really interesting. I've never been asked that. Thank you, Amelia. That's like now I'm gonna be thinking about that all day.
this
But
is my
anyway,
new thing. I go into
let's.
other people's podcasts and then I get really existential and then I'm all, bye, peace out.
Yeah, but I like thinking about like it's interesting to think about like
Yeah.
what is the modern. It's very interesting to think about. Listeners, isn't that fucking Amelia, man? Bringing in the big hitters.
Hey, I pulled that when I was on Mad and Finally Single, which is a fan podcast about Married at First Sight, and I got way too existential for that. They both
reality
looked at me
TV.
like I hit them in the face with a 2x4, and I was like, "We can move on. It's fine."
Yeah, I can imagine. That was a bit much for a reality TV show.
Summer and baby.
But anyway, let's take it back. Let's bring it back to Anna.
Okay.
Anna Dostoyevskaya. So it is my like great relief to tell you that their marriage was very different than the Tolstoys. And so Fyodor Dostoyevsky, some of you may know that name, wrote The Idiot and the Brothers Karamazov and Crime and Punishment, which is a fucking great book. All of those books are actually really good. So, and he was like Tolstoy, this famous, like kind of almost god of Russian literature, right? Although Dostoevsky does not start his own religion, spoiler alert, he doesn't start his own religion and go nuts like Tolstoy did at the end there.
So far, I'm on board.
You're suddenly religious again. I love it. So Anna, as they would say in Russian, was born September 12th in 1846 in St. Petersburg. And she was born into a very religious family. The Tolstoys were religious, but they weren't quite as fervent as it seems like Anna was. And so religious, in fact, that apparently as a kid, she ran away from home to go to a monastery. And the only way that her family could get her to leave the monastery was falsely convincing her that her dad was on his deathbed. They're like, "Oh, he's really sick. You gotta come now." And she was like, "Okay." And then she gets home and
and he's just fine. Oh,
love it. I love it. That kind of kid drama, weirdly hilarious. But her family, unlike the Tolstoys, was not from a lot of money. They weren't a very high class family. They were kind of more of a working class family. And Anna went to secondary school, but that was the extent of her education. She didn't have any higher education. And she does at some point, as she's becoming more of a young woman instead of a girl, she goes to stenography school. And at first she kind of struggled and she wasn't doing great. She didn't really like it. But her dad was like, "I think you really got to stick to it." And on his actual deathbed this time, he made her promise that she would finish stenography school. And so she did. And she did very well. And she did so well in stenography school that, in fact, when a certain Mr. Fyodor Dostoyevsky called the school asking for, to hire somebody to take down dictation for his novel, The Gambler, Anna was the one that the school recommended. So she shows up at his doorstep ready to work. And that is how they meet. It's very professional. It was a professional meeting. So I'll give a little, just for listeners and maybe for you, Amelia, I don't know how much you know about Dostoevsky, but here's a little bit of Dostoevsky's backstory. He also was not from money. So the Tolstoys both were from big money. They had money their whole lives,
yeah.
Right? So his family was actually kind of the opposite. They were stuck in very deep cycles of debt and poverty. And when his brother Mikhail died, not only did Fyodor have to financially support his brother's family that he left behind, but there also were all these debtors that came knocking saying that Mikhail's debt was now his debt. And Fyodor also was generally really trusting of everybody he met. And he didn't ask for the receipts. So he would just be like, "Oh, my brother owed you money. Okay, I'll pay it. I'll figure it out." And a lot of these fuckers were definitely taking advantage of him. They saw this situation and they were like, "Oh, this guy, And if you've ever read have you read The Idiot by chance?
Mm-mm. No, that's one I haven't.
It's fucking great. I keep saying that about all these books. Everybody read Russian literature. It's really good. I'm not kidding. But The Idiot is basically about a man who just trusts people so much that he loses his fortune and loses his. And I'm reading this about Dostoevsky because I didn't know much about Dostoevsky's life. And that is true of him as well. And at one point, actually, and I actually didn't put this in my notes, but it's good to include. At one point, he was arrested, and he was going to be executed. And at the very last minute, he was like, him and the whole group of people that were arrested were released, and he was sent to go to prison for 4 years. So he like served 4 years in a prison. Like, Crime and Punishment is like a little bit of real life, not fully real life. He didn't murder anybody, but like,
well, they do say
but
right what you know. So, being a trusting fool and having to go to jail are both things he knew.
exactly. So his life like has been like kind of fairly rough. He also was a widower at this time. So his first marriage was super unhappy. They were married about 7 years. Apparently he cheated on his first wife several times. And she ends up dying. But he's also left then to support his stepson from her first marriage, in addition to his brother's family. And all of this has all happened before this moment. And he's in all of this debt. And he basically, there was this like really, what do you call it? Nefarious. I like that word, nefarious. There was this very nefarious dude. I don't even think he was a publisher. Maybe he might have been some sort of like debt, like loan shark. It sounds like he was like a loan shark. But he basically was like, you need to finish this novel in a month or else you're going to owe me 5 times as much money as you already owe me. And he was like, oh, fuck, I got to write this book so fast. A month is really fast to write a book. Maybe it's not for like Superman, but it was really fast for Fyodor. Poor Fyodor.
Well, it would be
so he's
really fast even for anybody now with all the technology. I mean, it's not like he was typing it.
He wasn't, and that's the thing. So all of a sudden he's like, got to deliver this novel in a month. He's like, I got to hire someone to help me get this done. And that's when he calls the school and they send over Anna. And apparently Anna shows up at his door and he was not expecting a woman. And apparently he opens the door and he was like, oh, thank God you're a woman, because that means you can't ruin this project by drinking too much.
Because women can't drink too much, apparently.
Well, I think
maybe he had like old.
I think like there's a little bit of truth to like the generic like Russian men love to drink, like that was an experience that I experienced when I was there. And I think like women just are considered more morally upright and a little bit less like in excess in that way. That doesn't mean that they don't drink. That's obviously not true, but and so they get to work right away, and it was a little bit bumpy. Like at first he started to like dictate way too fast and she was like, whoa, slow down. And he was like a little, I don't want to say crusty, but like Fyodor's like a guy who has had a lot of problems in his life. And he also like goes through cycles of depression. And I think there's like a kind of a gruffness and like sad roughness to him, but they still like got along really well. They get the project done. They find a good rhythm. He figures out how to dictate slower, and they finish The Gambler, and he delivers it. But during this whole process, like she's over there all day, all the time. Like they're getting this done. They're taking their meal breaks together, probably smoke breaks together, I imagine. And they sort
breaks,
of like,
whatever.
Wasn't in my research actually.
I
feel like it would have showed up.
I want to say
it would have showed up.
I thought they all were kind of opium people, but I don't know. Maybe I made that up.
Well, it wasn't in my research, so I'm not gonna say it out loud.
I might be making things up. I apologize for that.
because he did have other problems that are in the research.
Yeah.
But they sort of kind of fall in love with each other in all these conversations. Except it's not like they're not like talking about it. They both just kind of develop these like mad crushes on each other. But they don't say, in true Russian style, they just like don't say anything. And they like keep in touch, and he keeps hiring her like for some of his other stuff he's got going on. And like he's at this point figured out like that he is like kind of crazy about her. And there is a big age difference between them. Did I say that at the beginning?
No.
I think I did. She was, I think it was about actually the same as let me see. Because he was born in, actually, let me do the math right in front of you on the podcast.
Well,
he was born in 21. He was born in 21, and she was born in Anna Oh, wait, I just said what her year of birth was. Good Lord. Should have done this ahead of time. Okay. We'll do Anna was born in 46, and he was born in
22.
What was it?
I think you said 22.
21. Yeah, so there's a 25-year difference between them.
Seems to be the magic number with these authors, man.
Magic Russian numbers. So basically to declare his love, this story is really cute. He basically writes a fake story. He writes up a fake story and he like runs it by Anna to see like what her opinion about it is. And it's like, well, what if this guy who's been to prison, who is in a lot of debt and has a lot of problems, like meets this young woman who just brings so much light to his life, but he's worried about upsetting her. He like goes through this whole narrative that's basically like the two of them, this like example of them, but with different names. And she finally is like, wait a minute, is this us? And she's like, yes, she would love you. She could love you. She could be with you. Like, and it's like this really cute romantic story.
That's very sweet.
It is very sweet. And they fall in love. And they end up getting married pretty quickly. Like, there's no reason to wait, I guess. And all of his like life problems don't disappear. So he's still in massive amounts of debt. And his stepson that is living there is also like an asshole. He like hates his new stepmother, his new like stepmother. And he makes life really hard on her. He gives her a really hard time. And all of these debtors are still knocking and all these people trying to take advantage of Fyodor, including his own family. Like every time he publishes a story and like gets a payment, it's like his family like knows and they show up and they're like, oh, I really need a new coat. And I really need this is like semi-normal stuff. Like I think in the history of families and family lives, especially like
I was going to say, I feel like even famous people today run into that same thing when everybody decides you're rich, then it's like.
Yeah. And Fyodor also has like a huge gambling problem. He is notoriously like very into roulette. And he like loses tons of money at the gambling table. And she adores him. First of all, she adores him. She also like throughout all of the research and all the quotes and stuff, she's constantly like, I don't understand how this guy could love me. Like, I'm just me. I'm just this woman who doesn't know very much, who's not very smart. Like, how could he love me so much? But he's like totally devoted to her, their whole marriage. He doesn't cheat on her. Like he had cheated on his first wife a couple times. He doesn't, like, at least in the research that I found, there wasn't like a record of that. He's extremely devoted to her. Very loving relationship, despite all the life problems they're going through. There's this kind of constant love. There's not this like bitterness about any of the stuff that they're going through. And she also, she continues working for him, taking his dictation, right? Like that's a part of their marriage. And she also knows him really, really well. And like apparently sometimes during editing, when he would like get notes from his editors, he would like get a note about like, hey, you gotta like move this comma or you gotta like move this sentence around. And he would like fly off the handle and he would write this like raging letter back to his publishers being like, fuck you, I don't have to do that, blah, blah, blah. You guys don't know what you're talking about. And I guess like the pattern of life was like that he would do that. And then he would wake up the next morning. He'd be like, oh my gosh, I wish I hadn't sent that letter. So what Anna starts to do is she like legit just like forgets to send the letter right away. Like, and then the next morning he's like, oh, I shouldn't have sent that letter. And she's like, oh, shoot, it didn't go out in yesterday's mail. Here it is. And he'd be like, oh, great. And he would rewrite it. He would send the kinder version that wouldn't get him fired by his publishers. Because he, like they didn't have the money the Tolstoys have. He is living check to check, deadline to deadline. So he needed to not piss off his publishers, right? But she knew him so well. There's also like a very much a vibe of like, he was like a very emotional and sometimes like emotionally roller coaster kind of person. And she very much was like, let's keep the calm and let's keep you balanced and keep you healthy. He also was epileptic, by the way. I should have said that at the beginning. So he also like had some, like he would like fall into seizures.
Yeah. They're terrifying. I don't know if you've ever been around when somebody has a seizure, but they're pretty scary.
Actually, yes, my younger brother used to have them when he was young, not since he's been an adult, but it is so scary. And the first time it happened was after they were already married, and she was like, there's like a quote of her where she's like terrified of like, I didn't know what was happening. Um, but since it happened kind of frequently, I guess you get used to it and you figure out like, what to do and all that. But it was pretty tough. But she really kind of tolerates it. She even, and one of the sources I was reading said that she actually ends up selling her dowry in order to pay for them to go abroad. Because part of this whole like debt cycle of like debtors and family and all this money situation and the gambling situation, she was like, if we don't get out of here, we're going to die. Like, and so she sells her dowry and they go to like, I think it was Switzerland or something. They go, or Sweden maybe, and they go for a couple years and they do end up coming back because ultimately they just can't stay away from Russia. But
nothing like going from one very cold climate into another very cold climate. Like,
exactly. But the fact that and because he was constantly in cycles of debt, they're constantly like pawning things to try to figure out how to get things paid and to like, and she is like helping to do that. Like she's managing their household. In 1880, she basically starts an independent publishing company to publish his work. It's called The Book Trade of F.M. Dostoyevsky, and it was incredibly successful. And so much like, Sofia Tolstoy, she's publishing her husband's work, and their financial situation improves considerably once that starts to happen. And once they've left and once they've kind of repaid the debts and gotten back on top, she basically like pulls him from the red to the black. It's not easy and it's not fast, but she does it. And they do have a couple of children. One of them dies very young. One of them dies when they're 3. They have they do have one child that lives to adulthood. Very heartbreaking though. And the research was talking about how when their first baby dies, that Fyodor is like distraught. And he's the one that he's like crying over I think there's even a quote that's like, he's crying like a woman over the babies, which like, I don't think that's an insult. I think
I don't either.
Maybe toxic masculine people think that's an insult, but like, there's this beautiful picture of a man so distraught that, that his child is died. But then when
if you're going to cry over a lot of things, I feel like that's.
Well, then when their son dies, when he was like 3 or 4, their third child dies. The tables flip and Anna's the one who's like completely despondent and he pulls her out of it. And they just have a very it's a very supportive and like loving relationship, which was really nice to read after all the Tolstoy stuff. In 1880, which is actually the same year she starts to do the publishing of the stuff, that's the same year he publishes Brothers Karamazov. Many people say that is his finest novel, his finest work. It's a great book.
I could see an argument for that.
Yeah, it's met with much acclaim, but unfortunately his health has takes like a huge downward spiral. And like a year later, he's basically on his deathbed. And like the article I was reading was saying that he had blood in his throat. I don't know if that's like tuberculosis. It didn't say tuberculosis, but I feel like that was what tuberculosis did.
Yeah, I mean you would cough up blood, yeah.
Yeah, coughing up the blood. And on his deathbed, like his devotion and love for her lasted throughout this whole time they were married, which I think was like 17 years, I believe. Either 12 or 17. I didn't do the math. On his deathbed, Anna describes in her memoir what the scene was like. Quote, I could not keep back my tears. Fyodor Mikhailovich began to comfort me, saying sweet, kind words, thanking me for the happy life he had lived with me. He entrusted the children to me, saying that he trusted in me and hoped that I would always love and cherish them. Then he told me the words that very few husbands can say to their wives after 14 years of marriage life. Remember, Anya, I have always passionately loved you and never betrayed you, even in thought. End quote. And then he died.
Yeah, that's sad.
Really quickly after that. She was only 34 years old when he died. But she did not remarry. She was not reinterested. She was not interested in remarrying. Later in her life, she would say, quote, I gave myself to Fyodor Mikhailovich when I was 20 years old. Now I'm over 70, and I still belong to him in every thought, in every action. Um, and after his death, she devoted her whole life to republishing her husband's books. She wrote her own memoir as well, but it's pretty much kind of, so as soon as her husband dies, like the wolves come out and they're like, he wasn't a great writer, he wasn't this, he wasn't, people talk shit like they still do today, like
Yeah, absolutely.
nothing changes in the cycle of humanity, I guess. But she writes a memoir, and it's thought that she pretty much writes the memoir in order to kind of like put him back in a good light again, because people were talking all this shit.
As they do.
And all her life, yeah. And all her life, she kind of collected everything of his and everything related to him. And in 1899, she transfers over 1,000 items to the Historical Museum for the creation of a special museum just dedicated to her husband. And I believe I actually been to that museum in Moscow. It's amazing. Or wait, no, I'm just kidding. That's in Staraya Russa.
Oh, okay.
I don't think I went there. I must be thinking of a different museum. I went to a bunch of museums when I was there, and I can't keep them all straight. But there's this museum, and it has all of his stuff. And she also opens a school, a parish school, named after him. And it served particularly the poor peasant families, and it had a boarding house. Ironically, because of our previous episode on the Tolstoys, when Mr. Tolstoy met Anna herself, he said about her, quote, "Many Russian writers would feel better if they had wives like Dostoyevsky had," end quote. In the very last year of her life, Anna she was kind of pretty ill. And she is in Crimea, in Yalta, and she ends up dying in June of 1918. When quoted about, like, there's lots of amazing quotes from her that I did not include in here, and shame on me, my bad. But she wrote quite a bit about her husband and in her memoirs and other published things that she did about him. And when people asked her, what was the key to having a successful marriage? This quote kind of stood out for me. Quote, "You must handle feelings with care so they don't shatter. There is nothing more precious in life than love. One must forgive more. Look for the fault within yourself and smooth your own rough edges." End quote. Which is, it's a double-sided quote in some ways. Like, in some ways, like, it's not always your fault, but at the same time, like, it takes two, and like being a partnership in marriage, like, it's just such a vastly different vibe from the Tolstoy marriage.
Absolutely.
And yet the result of it, and like the success of the published works and all that both of the women did for their husbands, has this like parallel. It's almost like in Anna Karenina, when you have the dual marriages and you see them side by side and how different they are and similar they are at the same time. It's so interesting, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that kind of stuff is just an examination into human behavior, and it's fascinating because some people do have these amazing, loving, marriages where they really are truly devoted to each other. And then there are other people who are like, whatever, it's just a piece of paper.
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah. And I also can't help but like feel like, when you can't help, I can't help but like compare them, right? And then you have this like very moneyed Tolstoy family, come from money, going to money. And you have these people who have like been struggling through poverty their whole lives. And yet both of those writers' minds were obviously magnificent. But like what a different, here the money guy becomes this kind of like pseudo god. He makes himself a pseudo god. And here you have Dostoyevsky on his deathbed, just telling his wife how much he loves her. And like, I was like doing the research. I was like almost crying about the Dostoyevskys.
Oh yeah, no, that's a beautiful, but that's also where, our imagination goes with romance and stuff. There's people on their deathbed.
That's true.
Their deathbed.
Stop attacking me, Amelia. I know I'm a romantic in my heart. I just don't want people to know
I love you. I'm just saying.
Yeah. No, I mean, and Russians are very romantic. Like Russian culture, Russian literature, very romantic. I mean, arguably, maybe some of the most aggressively romantic literature that's out there.
That is the best way to say it, though, is aggressively. They're aggressively romantic.
I'm not kidding.
Like,
it's very aggressive.
They take love and really grab it by the shoulders.
Like in Russia, when I was in Russia, I remember you see like a guy on the metro who has flowers that he's obviously bringing home to his woman, but he also has like a black eye, and you're like, aggressive? very aggressive. Like, yeah, so that's Anna Dostoyevskaya. And, it seems, she wasn't as like intellectually independent, I think, as Anna was, or as Sophia was. But she also was very smart. Like, she obviously was very influential in Dostoevsky's work and in helping him find success, even though she wasn't particularly learned in publishing. Like, that wasn't a skill she learned,
Well, and
and
being
she didn't
able
necessarily have
as
the
a woman
resources.
to take care of yourself on your own in those days is definitely an accomplishment all in and of itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because for a lot of people, especially if they didn't have money, your options were, especially as a woman, to get married, or get married. Like, you really didn't have
Yeah.
options.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm like also just like so utterly impressed with her ability to like help her husband out of that cycle, because I feel like that is a cycle that is really hard to break. And the debtors, and like that he was so kind and like didn't ask for receipts and was trying to pay like all these people, and he was a gambler. And he did end up giving up gambling of his own accord eventually. He was like, okay, I'm done. He finally
He also
threw the
picked like
towel
the
in,
worst game in gambling. Like roulette. My dad.
Is it the worst?
Well, no, my dad's a mathematician, and he gets so mad anytime he sees anybody playing roulette, because he's like, there's just no way that you're going to win. Like, he's like, you might win a little bit here and there, but statistically speaking, the house is always going to run away with everybody's money. Like,
I feel like if you bet like red or black, though, you like can win a little.
but that's
something,
what I'm saying, a little bit. But you have to go and play red or black, and then once you win your little something, go play a different game. So if he was only playing roulette, he might as well just walked in and handed them his money and left. Like,
he really is like a kind of a tragic character.
Yeah,
like,
totally. Which is probably why
But he kept believing like, oh, I'm gonna win it big for my family. Like, I'm gonna really be able to bring home and he apparently also like gave his. So he knew, he was self-aware. So he had Anna like hold the money. Like, he wouldn't, like, he gave her all the money, and then he would come back and be like, can I have a little more to play? And she would be like, okay. But like, he wasn't. Like, he was a weirdly self-aware, tragic character, and that he like saw his own flaws like as he was performing them.
Yeah.
Like, but that's like more than I can say about most people I know, I feel like. So it's almost this like really endearing quality.
Absolutely.
Like, to me. Maybe I messed up. Maybe I need to go to therapy about this.
We can go together. We'll call it our Broads You Should Know therapy sessions. And,
Maybe we should start that. Maybe we should start a separate podcast for that. Anyway, well, that is Anna Dostoyevskaya. Thank you, Amelia, for coming for this amazingly tragic walk through the wives of great Russian lit.
Of course. But yeah, no, I love it, and I'll be here next week.
To learn more about Anna Dostoyevskaya, see pictures of her and quotes from this episode, head on over to broadsyoushouldknow.com. While you're there, you can click on over to the About page and read more about me and Amelia. Our bios, photos, links to all our cool stuff, all right there. Are you following Broads You Should Know on social? We are on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram at Broads You Should Know, and Twitter at BYSK Podcast. Please give us a subscribe, a like, and some comments. To suggest a broad, fill out the form on our website or email us at broadsyoushouldknow@gmail.com. If you are a fan of this podcast, to help support us, share an episode with your friends and family, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That really helps new listeners to find us. Broads You Should Know is produced by me, Sarah Gorski, and edited by Chloe Skye, with original music by Darren Callahan. Finally, if you really enjoyed the story of Anna Dostoyevskaya and you want to hear some other episodes of women who also were a bit overshadowed by their husbands in their lifetimes, you should check out our episodes on Merle Evers, Coretta Scott King, the Invisible Battalion, the women of the Ukrainian army, and our Background Broads episodes, including Anna Murray Douglas, who was Frederick Douglass's wife. See you next week for another Broad You Should Know.